Hello, everybody. Welcome to my webinar, Options for Artists and Entertainers. I just wanted to mention a couple of things. First of all, for those of you who registered last week, and I apologize, deeply apologize. We had some technical difficulties. I believe our internet service was down in the area, and it went down literally minutes before the presentation was about to begin, so we were able to tether some internet connection, and I was able to kind of cancel the presentation and let you all know. So I do apologize for that. Thank you for joining me or rejoining me today. And another quick disclaimer is that, I'm going to go through these options. This by no means these are your only options, and obviously this is, kind of general information, and it's not really supposed to be taken as advice. Each person's situation is definitely unique. So I just wanted to let you know that, obviously. My name is Fuji Whittenburg. I'm an attorney here at Wolfsdorf Immigration Law Group. We're in Santa Monica and in the Los Angeles area, and we also have a New York office. I practice primarily in entertainment, so this is what I do, on a regular basis. I also have webinars regarding, students and, other options, but we are a full-service immigration law firm. And I think that's it. And I'll run through the slides. And if you do have questions, feel free to email me afterwards. Hopefully I'll address all of your questions, but obviously if I don't, I'm more than happy to help answer your questions via email, or if I can't, I'll figure out a way to get back to you. So for those of you listening, for artists and entertainers, if you look it up, if you Google it, the best category would be the O visa. It is literally, it's the artist visa for extraordinary ability or extraordinary achievement, depending on the classification. There are two. We won't talk too much about the first one because this is mostly about arts and entertainment. But there's a slightly higher classification, O1A, science, education, business, or athletics. For some reason, fashion models tend to fall into this category. I prepare a lot of O1s for fashion models. There is one case that USCIS likes to refer to. It's called Ford models, where they say that the model earns so much that she qualifies under the business category. I don't believe or agree or understand that logic, but that's where it is right now. And then the second classification, where everyone else falls under, is the ONB, arts or motion picture TV. So there are two subcategories within that one. It's arts, which includes musicians, artists, visual effects artists, sound engineers, art directors, creative directors. And then the second is motion picture TV, and so that covers anybody involved in motion picture TV, so actors, writers, directors, etc. And then there are dependent and essential support personnel visa categories that I will talk about briefly, the O2 and the O3 visas. So getting started, for the O1 visa standards, as I mentioned, arts, motion picture TV are two separate subcategories, and so they each actually have their own separate little nuances and a difference in some of the criteria. And it's really the wording. It may seem insignificant to you, but to the adjudicator and to me, they are very, very significant. Excuse me, I have a pop-up that keeps coming up. O1B arts is distinction, so high level of achievement, and then O1B is extraordinary achievement, high level of accomplishment. So that's a lot of the language we have to use. In terms of how to meet the criteria, and again, this is a lower standard compared to the sciences and business that I mentioned earlier, but it still requires some heavy documentation. You can either show that you have won a major award, so an Emmy, Grammy, SAG Award, BAFTA. I mean, I would even argue possibly, obviously a film festival, if you're nominated for Sundance, Cannes, even in any other international film festival, I would still try to argue that. It's either that one award, so one-time achievement, or three of the following. And there are 6 criteria listed here, But they do, and I'll go through them, and then they do also allow for comparable criteria, which we try to also include. But in terms of, it's better for me a lot of times when I use an actor, or just an example, and by example I will use an actor, let's say. So in terms of meeting the criteria, performed and will perform services as the lead or starring, participant. So what, your credits as a lead actor or actress. The next would be national or international recognition, which would be press. So any articles or press that you have received or any reviews of your work would be included here, even if, let's say, the film or the short film has received some really positive reviews in the, it doesn't have to always be the Hollywood Reporter or anything like that, but, we would like to include all press, again, about you or your work, which would include your performance or the film. The next would be your lead starring or critical role for organization and establishments. I know that sounds very similar, but to the first one, that first one is productions or events, so meaning the movie, TV show, play. The organizations and establishments would be the actual network or studio behind it. So that would be the NBC or the Universal. They're the same, actually, not the same company. But so that's where the distinction is made. The next would be commercial or critically acclaimed success. So we try and pull, TV ratings. If you have been on a TV show, let's say in Australia, where it's particularly popular, we would say, it's the longest running TV show in Australia. This is information about the network. This, 2 million viewers every night or tune in to this TV show. The next one would be reference letters, and this is actually probably the, sometimes the easiest and the hardest to get, where it's, you want to have a good mix of letters from people that you have worked with. So again, using the example of an actress, let's say you you appeared in the director's film, and you get a letter from the director. Even if you didn't have the lead or starring credit, you can get a letter from the director talking about what your critical and important contributions were to the film in that role and in the particular scenes that you were in, how pivotal your role was to the scenes, and then, obviously to the message of the film or the, TV show. So you have that kind of a specific letter, but then you also have general reference letters from people that you probably have not worked with, who would be willing to talk about what your reputation is in the industry, kind of more regionally, and then also internationally. Say, I've never worked with this person, but I've heard of them, X, Y, and Z credits, kind of something like that. So letters of reference are great. And then the last one is high salary or remuneration is the more formal word. But so let's say you are an art director, and you're an art director for a commercial, and for example, say the Chevy commercial for the new car, and you're paid $10,000 for that one job. I mean, that's a good example. So you can use pay stubs, invoices even, contracts, things like that. And you're compared to other people in your field and other people in your field in your country. So it would be, if you're in the U.S., then you would be compared to other Americans. But if you're, in Spain, you would be compared to other, let's say other art directors in Spain. What are they being paid? And if you can show you're, slightly higher than that, then I would use that evidence. So these are some examples of the types of evidence that you would need. Providing that documentation and evidence is really, really important. So, we can't just say that you were in a role, unless it's published on IMDb. Again, it's easy for me to stick with the acting, I feel like, or, motion picture TV is pretty well documented in a lot of respects. So that's why I'll refer to it. But let's say you're a musician, and if you're in a band or if you performed on someone else's album, hopefully they'll mention you in the liner notes, saying, keyboard, you were the keyboard player for the album, or maybe even in the thank you credits of the liner notes. And when all else fails, obviously the letters are good, but the letters are good to fill in the holes. In terms of the evidence, it's better to provide anything. Primary evidence is always better. Obviously, you want to try and meet at least 3, but try and aim for higher. So that's the evidence. It's, I always say there are 2 parts of a petition. One is that you qualify, you actually have the credits, and 2 is that you have a sponsor and an employer or an agent that's going to sponsor you, and that you actually have some upcoming work. And that's something that immigration really, really wants to see, and they're stuck on it. And then if you are in motion picture TV, and I'll get to this later, but you're required to get advisories from the unions, and obviously they want to protect their members, so they really want to make sure you're here and not just auditioning, that you have a job. So let's talk about employers versus agents. So there are 2 types of petitioners. One is the employer as a petitioner. That's where it's, a full-time employment situation. Let's say you're a chef, and they're applying for an O1 for you to be the executive chef at, an Italian restaurant, for example. Or if you're a visual effects artist with a studio, you're going to be an animation, an animator at DreamWorks. That's the more classic situation. And you're allowed to have concurrent O1s. So a lot of times animators, they'll have, one with DreamWorks and one with, Pixar. I'm just using these as examples. In that situation, no itinerary is needed because it's kind of more in the classic, full-time employment situation. They may ask you for it if it's not clear. If you're, let's say, a music supervisor for a production company, they may need some more information. So it's a really good idea to be as clear as possible in terms of what you will be doing with your employer. But that's the one kind of way you can do it. The second way is to have an agent or manager to be the petitioner. And this is obviously very, very common in the arts and entertainment industries to have an agent or manager. Most people are freelance. It's project to project. You don't want to be tied down. That's the most common question that I get from people is, I don't want to just work with one person or one company or one, I don't want to work on this one film. I want to be able to, take as many jobs as possible. So that's the agent situation. For this one, they are really, there's lots of guidance out there from immigration where they really want to see that you have a deal memo, which is, we call it a deal memo or a contract or an agreement, and it doesn't matter in what form it comes, as long as the specific terms of representation are there, so that they're representing you as a model and what the compensation is. It doesn't have to be that you're getting paid $200 per commercial or whatever it is, but in the way that in that situation, usually you're paying them 20%. So for all work that they get for you, you get 80%, they get 20%. So as long as the terms are described in that contract or agreement or summary of the terms or a deal memo, along with a few specifics about what you will be doing, then that should suffice. I say should because immigration loves to issue requests for evidence for this specific requirement. I mean, it's really random. So if any of you have had any experience in this, you understand what I'm talking about. Sometimes they want to see, things super specifically, like as a musician, they want to know. They'll ask you for an itinerary with the dates and locations and agreements between, you and the bar or the venue, showing, what dates and all that. So it just depends. You want to try and, be as specific as possible in that agreement and understand that that's, if you understand what they're looking for, I think you would be able to provide it. Another important note is that you may add additional performances or engagements during the validity period without filing an amended petition. And so that's really great because, again, in arts and entertainment, things change. I mean, movie funding drops out at the last second, or, all of a sudden a producer pulls out or the lead actress pulls out, and so, the production schedule is pushed back, whether it's, indefinitely, permanently, temporarily. So I think this this language is in there to kind of help with that, because things change, whether it's weather, whatever it is. Performances can be canceled at the last minute. Likewise, you can add some things at the last minute. But again, they have to be in line with the petition. So if you're filing an O1 as a keyboard player, but then you want to add a TV performance, then if you did as a musician and then you want to, to add an acting performance, that may be an issue, and usually that's up to the network or the production company or studio. But so that's where you may need to get a separate O1 if you want to do acting. So the event, in terms of the itinerary, the O1 can be approved up to 3 years at a time, and this can be, renewed. It's renewable indefinitely. And the petition, we always, and most people, usually request 3 years at a time, the maximum amount of time. And technically, the petitions are only approved for the duration of the event. So an event, they give a long list of, examples. An event includes a contract. So that's why it's really important to have that representation agreement if you're with an agent or a manager, because technically that should, that should qualify as the event itself. But sometimes, again, in the arts, especially if you have a contract as a musician, they want to see what you'll be doing. If it's not fully described in the petition, they may ask you for an itinerary, And so writing music, recording music, promotional events, it's not just about performances. You don't have to have performances lined up for 3 years straight. You'd be exhausted. So all that other stuff is included, and you just want to kind of be able to bridge the gaps. You want to string them together. So whenever possible, you want to try and think ahead, including all of the events surrounding what you do. Okay, so this brings me to the advisory/peer opinion consultation letter that everybody is required to get in the O1 visa classification. You have to get it from the appropriate union or agency. So in the arts, it would be, it's usually from a national organization. If one doesn't exist, you can use a peer consultation letter. So it should just be, from somebody who's, somewhat established or prominent in your specific industry. So for, that would be one that you have somebody write. In terms of, a musician, you have to get, they'll issue you a request for evidence. They'll want you to get a letter from the American Federation of Musicians, so AFM. Likewise, if you're a visual effects artist, they want something from the VES. And so, it kind of depends on your specific category. For motion picture TV, it's not as loose. It's much more clear, and you have to get 2 advisories, one from the management organization and then also one from the labor union. And so you would, for instance, if I'm using the example of an actor, director, or producer, you would get SAG if you're an actor, or SAG-AFTRA now is what it's called, DGA if you're a director, PGA if you're a producer, and then also from AMPTP, which is the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. So you would have to get 2. Each one, they usually cost between $250 and $500. So, and where there's 2, that really kind of adds up. So that's something to keep in mind when you're adding up the costs of the visa. The peer letters, if there is no union or organization, then you can just use a letter from someone in the industry. Obviously, those don't usually cost any money. It's just a matter of getting those letters. But you can actually check the union websites for their particular guidelines. USCIS actually publishes the list of organizations that they refer to. So oftentimes, where it's a little ambiguous and we don't include the consultation letter, we'll get a request for evidence, which is also called an RFE. We get RFE'd for these all the time. So something to take note of. And if for some reason you do get an adverse opinion, which we've received before, let's say from the Directors Guild, for example, if they give us, they say, no, we don't agree with you, we don't think that she's a director of extraordinary achievement, we have still, if I'm not able to convince them otherwise, we still submit it, because ultimately I don't know, I mean, this sounds odd because USCIS requires that the opinions, but at the same time the opinions are not binding on USCIS. So I think if you're able to overcome it with your evidence and demonstrate, that you are an extraordinary director, then you would be able to overcome it. And I've had cases approved where even if the DGA or, let's say SAG-AFTRA said no, we did get the O1 approved. So don't be too discouraged if they come back with a negative advisory. And again, their biggest concern is to make sure that you actually have some projects lined up. That's what they really like to see, and will really push to get from you or from your petitioner, from your attorney, because again, they don't want you here auditioning for jobs, and they're protecting the interests of their members. So what are the basic filing procedures and requirements for the O1? We talked about this earlier. So there's the petitioner. You want to show your evidence to show you meet at least 3 of the criteria. So you want to make sure you have that. A deal memo or a contract between you and your sponsor. You want to be able to show that. Make sure, because again, no speculative employment. The peer consultation letter, whether you get someone from a peer in the industry or an advisory, it just depends on your field. It's an additional cost, so something to keep in mind. And then, again, in terms of when the petitioner is an agent or a manager, you really want to make sure that there's the contract and the itinerary. And usually in this situation where there's an agent or a manager, for those of you who might be in this process or starting out, it's not uncommon to receive an RFE. Even if those things are included in the application, they may still issue an RFE. So that's something that a lot of people are thrown off about, or they get worried or nervous. It just happens. Sometimes things are included and the officer somehow misses it or overlooks it. So it doesn't always mean that that what you provided was wrong in the initial application, but that they're just asking you to really spell it out for them or to show it to them again. So here I have listed the documents for filing. You can either file, there are only 2 service centers, California for the West Coast, Vermont for the East Coast. I always get asked, is one better than the other? I mean, I primarily file in California, so maybe I'm partial to California. I deal with it. I think it's fine. But, at this point, I think they're starting to kind of streamline and, normalize adjudications on both sides. They used to say that Vermont was sometimes easier, but it just, honestly, I think, what you want to focus on is building the strongest case possible and filing it. It does come down to jurisdiction. So if there are, based on your location of employment, where do you intend to live and work? If your agency is based in Los Angeles, it doesn't make sense to file it in Vermont, because that's not really truthful. Even if you do travel around a lot for your work, I mean, it's an argument that can be made. Let's say the agency is here in LA, but you're spending all your time in New York, then, on that, based on that, you could maybe use their, New York address to file it. So it's just kind of part of the strategy, but nothing to, put all your eggs into that basket for. Normal versus premium processing. So right now, O's are actually being adjudicated within about 2 to 3 weeks, which is fantastic. It's really, really great. So if that, since that's the case, I don't recommend premium processing. I do recommend premium processing where you're under really tight, production timelines, because, there is a way, I mean, that I do, I don't know if, I'm assuming most people do it, but you can contact premium processing if there's a business urgency. If you can show that production is set to start on, Monday and you need a quick turnaround, filing by premium processing just gives you, gives your attorney really access to their office so that they are able to explain the urgency, and you can get it approved a little bit quicker. So that's where, especially right now, that's where I would have it. But a couple years ago, normal processing was like 2 to 3 months. So, which obviously is not really feasible in the entertainment industry when production timelines, are kind of, they're always rushed and urgent. So that's the difference between normal and premium. Another common question is, which occupation, especially in entertainment, people, you're a model and an actress, or I'm an actor and a musician. I'm and this is a new thing I've heard about, the predator, the producer, let me see if I can get it right, the producer, editor, director, predator, is that right? So there, people are starting to take on more roles. They're wearing a lot more, more hats, different hats, I should say. And so they have broad credits. So in one sense, having lots of credits is great, but when you're applying for the O1, you have to say O1 in X. So O1 as a director, O1 as a producer. So whatever you're wanting to do in the U.S., you also have to show or demonstrate your achievements, your past achievements and accomplishments and credits in that capacity. So that's where it becomes a little bit tricky, and that's something to think about. It's not as easy as just being like, I want to do it all. So, in the petition, say acting, acting, modeling, singing. You can't, I mean, again, you could if you are, I'm trying to think of someone maybe that's, I don't know, I can't think of anybody, but, those people like actors who have been on Broadway and in film and on television and who've done all sorts of things, then you probably can establish your credits in all of those different areas. But otherwise, we really try and focus on what your best credits are and what you'll be doing in the U.S. and kind of go for that one. You can narrow the field too, which is my second point. I mean, if you're mostly a commercial actor, then your credits are going to be different than if you are a film and TV actor. And I actually think it works in your favor to make that distinction. Some would probably argue against that. But sometimes it's good to set yourself apart a little bit, because if you're a commercial actor, it's good to get the officer to compare you to other commercial actors. Oftentimes I don't want them to, in their head, think of like Brad Pitt or Leo DiCaprio, because then it's almost unachievable. It's out of reach, when you're being compared to film and TV actors, or their equivalent in your home country. And so it's kind of nice to do that in terms of, again, musicians. Not everyone's going to be a Celine Dion or a member of Maroon 5 or something like that. So sometimes it's nice to set yourself apart, whether it's as an Italian opera singer or a classical guitarist or a children's music writer, something like that. Or a sommelier, that's another I just did for somebody, a sommelier, which I thought was, it's unique. And so automatically the officer is going to be like, oh, that's different. We don't have, there aren't a lot of people like that. And they don't have a, kind of a frame of reference to compare you to, which sometimes actually works in your favor. So in terms of the arts, motion picture, TV standard, really what they'll do is they'll look at what you'll be doing in the U.S. And this, I recently just had this issue for somebody who is a musician, and he's being brought in to be a film composer, but his credits aren't really in motion picture TV. So it's kind of weird in terms of the consultation letters and everything, because he's such a great musician, they want him to compose this music for film. So those are the little tiny nuances, again, hopefully your attorney will be able to handle. But it's, you want to make it clear, and if USCIS is confused, and if they are confused, then they'll probably issue you an RFE and ask you for an advisory letter. Just a few tips for you, and I'm trying to move along as quickly as possible, but if for any reason we run out of time, again, email me with your questions. But some tips: save everything, anything that has your name on it, anything you've ever been involved with, save it as evidence. You know, it's good to be organized now because you never know what may come up later. And usually by the time you get a petitioner or you're booked for a job or you get this wonderful opportunity, you're scrambling. You're scrambling for the evidence. You're scrambling for translation. So any articles that are written in a language other than English, you want to make sure you have English translations on hand. And if you're saving press or magazine articles, if they're print, you just want to make sure that the magazine name and the date of publication are somewhere on that copy that you have. If it's online, then that's obviously easier because it's usually like a date stamp when you print it out, and the publication name is in the header of the printout. Filing an extension, so for those of you who are already on an O1 and you want to file an extension, previously what they were doing is anytime you filed an extension, they just automatically gave you the 1 year, and you just had to keep continuing, you know, extending it every year, which is really costly, and you know, and a year flies by. It really goes by so quickly. 3 years even to me flies by, but 3 years is better. So there are some, if you can show that there are new events, which like the ones that I was describing earlier, so a new contract or new clients or new activities, new projects. So as a model, if you know you have these new projects lined up, I always try and make that argument so that you can get that 3-year extension. Again, it's discretionary. You know, USAS, the officer reviewing it, they could look at it and be like, you know what, this doesn't seem like it to me, and they'll only approve it for a year. But we've been really lucky, and it's definitely worth thinking about when you're filing an extension. I always try and include some updated evidence. You can use your same advisories if you're filing in the arts. So for musicians, for instance, you can use your American Federation of Musicians advisory if you're filing it within 2 years of your last one. And where it's questionable, again, you can use the old one, and then just with the understanding that they could RFE you for it. Motion picture TV, they're pretty, you know, they're pretty particular, and you know, the older advisories were a little bit, they were issued kind of more generically. They didn't have the specific projects or the petitioner listed, but now they draft them so specifically that a lot of times, you know, you can't really reuse them. If they're within the same year, I try to, but you may need to get a new one. And so again, it's something to keep in mind in terms of extra fees when you're filing an extension, but also timeline. They usually take about a week, the advisories, the unions, the motion picture TV ones. Some are a little bit quicker than others, but they do, you know, I would factor in an extra week of processing for that. And this actually just came up today at a consulate in London for me, this erroneous visa denial at the consulate. So let's say you file everything, you know, SAG and AMPTPA say, oh yeah, she's an actress of extraordinary ability, everything's great, you get your approval notice. Once you get the approval notice, you're required to go have your visa interview at the consulate abroad, you know, usually in your home country. And at that point, really they're looking to make sure that you are who we said you are in the petition, that there's no fraud or misrepresentation, and that you really are a, you know, X of extraordinary achievement. And, you know, hopefully that really should be the whole point of it. But sometimes it has come up where, you know, they ask you more questions or they don't believe you, and they think that there was some fraud. So that's something to be aware of. Again, these are tips probably for attorneys that are listening, but it does come up randomly. So you just want to make sure that everyone's prepared with all of their documents and things for the visa interview. Some other alternatives to think about, I actually go through, there's another slide, a few slides down that actually list more alternatives, but these would be specific to kind of motion picture entertainment. An O2 is a great option. Let's say, you know, your credits are good, but maybe they're not quite there. You've been an assistant director to this director who's an O1 who you've worked with on, you know, 2 prior films, for example. Then as long as they're on an O1, you would qualify as an O2. So a lot of times a director will want to bring their assistant director on a movie or a TV film project and want to work with that same person. So you would have to demonstrate a prior working relationship. You have to have that prior working relationship in order to qualify under those standards. And a lot of times if you can show continuity, let's say, for example, let's say you and your film crew, you've filmed half of a film on location in Prague, for example, and you filmed half of it and you want to film the rest of it in the United States, what you could do is get an O1 for the strongest person. So let's say the lead actor, and then get O2s for everybody else. So the director, the cinematographer, the supporting actors and actresses, for everyone else. So that's an interesting option for films, again, for continuity purposes. There is such a thing as a B2 amateur entertainer visa. It's pretty unique. It's very specific. I've included the citation here. It's for, non-professional entertainers, and it can't be paid, and you have to show that you're in a contest or a talent show. And again, that's very specific and limited because it's a B2, which is short-term. And then there's also the P visa, which I'm going to discuss next. The O2, I'll go into a little bit more detail about this. Again, so this is where there's continuity or they've worked together in the past. The O1 has to remain in place. So let's say there's an O1 director. He brings his O2 assistant director. And then the O1 from the UK decides to go back to the UK because another project has come up. That O2 then terminates. So they either have to leave or they have to transfer their O2 to an O1. So it's good, but there are limitations. It is tied to that O1, so it's something to be aware of. And the O2 requires a separate petition and its own forms and everything else, and consultation letter and everything else. It's just the standards, in terms of the evidence itself is not as high as qualifying for the O1. So it's a great way of kind of, building up your credits, or if you have this great project and there is an O1, to tie you to, that's good. O1 arts athlete, you're assisting in the performance of the O1, your integral and critical skills and experience. For film and TV, again, working relationship or the continuity thing, which is what I was talking about earlier. I was getting ahead of myself. And then, you have to show that the O2s are essential to the completion of the film. Okay, so let's move on to the P visa. There are there's always, subcategories and multiple categories. What I'll talk about mostly are the P1 for the entertainment groups. There is a P1 for internationally recognized athletes. So, I've done P1s for skateboarders or, boxers. Usually it's where you're, I've done a lot for individuals. You can do them for, other mixed martial artists and things like that. Or there's the entertainment group. There's a P2, which is a reciprocal exchange program. And then P3 is for culturally unique performers. They're very nuanced as well. So I'll talk about the P1 broader category. So there's the athletes, and then there's the entertainment group. If you're coming to perform as a member of an entertainment or musical group, so a band, for example, you have to show that that they've been recognized internationally for a substantial period of time. There are certain criteria. So in terms of the band, let's say 75% of the members have been together for at least 1 year. So this won't work if you're, if it's a new band. But if the band has been in existence, like 3 members of the band have been in existence for 2 years and they want you to come and be their lead singer, then that would work. And then let's say, again, I'm using the band example, the band has to be internationally recognized. So hopefully they've toured internationally. Let's say they've toured a lot in Japan, for example. They have some press there. They've done, they've played with, some well-known musicians. And maybe they've produced some albums that have been included in some charts, or they've gotten lots of good reviews, something like that. That's where you can kind of demonstrate it. This standard is not as high as the 01 standard, so it's definitely better, and it's a great option in the band situation. And then if any, individuals, if they're not performing as part of the group, they can apply for the 01. You can do an 01 as an individual as well. The P3, the culturally unique, again, is very nuanced. Under a program that's culturally unique, there's a whole definition. There's a great case about it. It's called Skirball, matter of Skirball. Again, that's super specific for this group, but I'm happy to answer questions. In terms of the P1 application, what do you need? I mean, there's always the general form, support letter, evidence, but you also here want to include the dates of everyone joining the band, because like I said before, they have to show that it was an established band and they've performed regularly together for at least 1 year. And so give that kind of information. I like to try and give it up front, because then you can avoid a request for evidence situation down later, and obviously that causes delays when you're like in a rush, and let's say you have a couple performances, let's say a California tour set up, and they're just waiting for you. And then there's a consultation letter again. So as a band, it's the AFM, American Federation of Musicians. And then evidence of the contract, and then just as much as you can, an itinerary listing the dates and locations of your performances, and that the band will be writing at this point. They're writing together, they're recording it, whatever studio here in Hollywood, and you just want to give an idea so that the officer has an understanding of what it is exactly you will be doing. And really, I think that will help you with a more successful application. Obviously, it's very discretionary, but those are the things that I have found to help. The more information that you can give, you should. In terms of the criteria, again, similar to the 01, there's the one-time achievement, so some sort of award or nomination, or at least 3 of the following, and then again, it's very similar to the 01 criteria. It's really about the reviews, interviews about, the group. Let's say they have a distribution contract with, Universal Music in Australia. There are all sorts of things, but usually it's going to be some sort of, and I'm thinking in terms of a band, but performances at certain venues or music festivals, like the Edinburgh Music Festival, or record sales, or iTunes downloads of a particular song if it did really well, or licensing agreements for certain songs. There's all sorts of things that you can, for each classification, there's all sorts of evidence that's out there. Okay, so that concludes the P1. Some other options, which I kind of touched upon earlier, and again, I'm not going to go super in-depth with them, because the O and the P visas are probably the broadest and the most common types of visas for people in the arts and entertainment industry. But there are some other options that can help you, whether it's short-term or things that are maybe a little bit more creative or progressive. There's the B1, B2 entertainer visa, which is, again, very limited for specific purposes. There's an E1, E2 investor visa, which I've done before for, let's say, if you're a French producer, you've done really well and you want to set up your own production company in the U.S. and you have the financial backing to do so, kind of like $150,000, $200,000 that you want to invest in a U.S. company to set up a production company. You have some clients in the works, perhaps U.S. clients that you've done projects for abroad in France or Brazil or whatever, and you really want to come here and run the production company here. That's an option. There's E1, E2. You have to be a treaty country national. That's the thing. So it depends on your nationality. There's an E3, which is for Australians, and then the general H-1B professional occupation visa. This would be more common for behind-the-scenes folks, so animators, graphic designers, people who are actually in production. That could be a good option. like I mentioned above, there's also the B1 amateur performer or musician, so no money. There's an I visa for journalists and bloggers. You can also do an O1 for a blogger. I've actually done several over the last couple of months, which is kind of picking up speed. Bloggers are super popular, so that's a good way of kind of, you know, building up your own credits. People love blogging and bloggers, so if you can get a lot of, you know, something that, and I actually, now that I'm thinking of it, social media, in terms of your O1 or your O1 evidence, having a lot of followers on, you know, Twitter and Facebook and subscribers to your blog and all of those things. USCIS is really starting to pay attention to that because obviously that is just another form of evidence showing that you're, you know, prominent or well-known, or you have an international reach. So that's something also to keep in mind. But anyways, I for journalists, so you have to be a member of the foreign media. Maybe you are a music journalist for, you know, a popular website abroad, and they want to send you here to work in the U.S. and continue reporting for their news organization, but here in the U.S. That's definitely a possibility. You can't work for U.S. news organizations, though. So, you know, I get that question a lot. It's really meant for you to work for, you know, what's NMD, which is, I think, a UK music publication, or if MTV Australia wants you to come and work in the U.S., and you would have to stay on MTV Australia's payroll and all of that stuff. So but it's a great option for journalists and bloggers. There's also the H3 or the J1, which is a trainee intern visa, and again, that's pretty specific, but there are, you know, trainee visas for the performing arts and visual arts. You need a company sponsor, and there are a lot of sponsoring companies out there that actually handle this paperwork for you. So that's also a really great option if you feel like the O&P, you know, you don't qualify for them and they're a little bit out of reach. These may be good options too, short term, while you're building up your credits. Okay. So let's see, we finished up the work visa discussion. Hopefully, you know, one of those you can qualify for. And again, I'm happy if you send me your resume or CV. I can pretty quickly kind of give you an idea of what, you know, if you have a good application, what you should maybe focus on or build up, and then, you know, I can help kind of assess that category. But for those of you listening who, let's say you've been here on an O1, you've had 2 or 3 O1s, and you're like, you know what, I'm tired of, you know, of my agent or manager taking, you know, 20% of my income, or, you know, that kind of a thing. If you're ready to kind of have a green card, you've decided this is where you want to live, you've really reached a good place in your career, then the green card is the best option. For almost everybody in arts and entertainment, they want to freelance. They don't want to be tied to an employer. It's almost not possible to be tied to an employer. So this is what you would fall into the EB-11, Alien of Extraordinary Ability category. This one is the top, you know, the highest level of, and then EB, just to give you a background, is employment-based. So that's why it's EB-1, and there's EB-1 through EB-5, EB-1 being at the very top. Although it sounds the same as the O1, it is very similar. A lot of the evidence and criteria on its face is very similar, but the standard is much, much higher. Adjudications are much tougher. Offices are more strict about the evidence, and they're a lot more closely scrutinized than the O1. That being said, you know, the O1 is a nice stepping stone, and hopefully after you've been on the O1 for some years, you've really been continuing to work in your field, building up those credits. But it does not mean just because you've had 2 O1s in the past that you know, qualifying for the EB-1 is easy, or that it's automatic, or that it's expected. It's, you know, it's one of those arguments. Obviously, we say, you know, they've demonstrated their extraordinary ability with these, you know, 10 O1s, but it's not automatic. And so for this, you self-petition, which is really what everybody's looking for. And you have to show that you're one of a small percentage who has risen to the very top of the field, and that's, their wording. You also have to show your sustained national or international claim. So sustained being the key word, not that you've done really well for a couple of years, or you had one album that did really well, or one film that did really well. They want to show, kind of steady and sustained acclaim, at the top of your field for, a period of time. I don't have a magic number. For some people in some industries, it's 5 years, and for some it's, 20. It's one of those things where, like they say, I'll know it when I see it, which is kind of the way that a lot of these standards are. So evidence includes, again, like the 01, one-time achievement, or 3 of, this time there are 10 criteria. And so we'll discuss those. Actually, the 10 are listed here. Let me quickly touch upon one-time achievement, major international awards. So one-time achievement, in this sense, in the green card sense, really does mean, that you've won an Emmy, you've won a Grammy, something like that would be one-time achievement. In the sciences, it's the equivalent, like a Nobel Prize. I mean, these are the examples that they give to us in the regulations. But again, I mean, it is arguable, and we definitely want to include it. So awards and nominations really are important to keep track of. And obviously, these are all goals that you individually each have professionally within your careers. So often it feels very silly for me to be like, really try and get an Emmy nomination, because I know that really that's probably, that is what, in your performances you are trying to, get to that place. And so I get it. It's very silly, but it's good to keep track of, and hopefully one of those things will come through. If they don't, you just have to show 3 of these 10. And again, I'll go through them generally. I don't want to spend too much time on specifics, but this is where in prizes and awards, membership in certain associations, not being a card-carrying member is not enough. It has to be, there have to be criteria. You have to be selected. You should be voted into the National Academy of Arts and Sciences, or the Grammys, for instance. Those are the types of things where it's not just, oh, you've been doing it for 5 years, you're an automatic member, or you just paid dues. So that's a really, really common misconception that people have. It has to be an elite organization. Published materials. So here they want published materials about you. It's not, for the 01, it's okay if it's about you and, you and your work or the film. Even then they, may call into question. But here they want to show, or they want to see that you have been interviewed, or your work has been, she was the, she played the role of Rose spectacularly. The emotion that she evoked was, this, that, and the other. So in addition to that, and then in terms of the circulation information, they want to show that it was published in mainstream media or major publications. So that's where you want to be able to provide, circulation figures. And again, this is something that, hopefully your attorney would handle. But just so you have an idea of kind of the significance of the press, the more prominent the publication, the better it is. Obviously, again, not everything's going to be a cover story on, Vanity Fair, but they tend to give less weight to, the Hamilton newspaper, some small, kind of your town's newspaper, like, oh, look at this. But again, my argument is all press is good press, so we'll include it. Judge of the work of others. It's pretty self-explanatory. Original contributions of major significance. This is one that everyone tries to use, and I do too. They tend to be really tough on this because it's so vague, but you want just to be able to show the impact of your work. If people are copying your dance style, if you're a choreographer and you invented or created this specific dance move, you know, and other people are copying it, then copying is, you know, the imitation is the highest form of flattery, right? So that's where that comes into play in this this category. I try to use it there as much as possible. Authorship, a lot of times in arts and entertainment, this just doesn't exist. They're really picky about scholarly article anyways. But if you are, let's say, you know, a director or something, and you teach a class on directing at the USC Film School, and you have published, you know, some articles or something like that for the, you know, for the textbook or something for the curriculum, then yeah, that's where it would fall under. Display of your work at artistic exhibitions and showcases. Usually they want to see this for artists. I argue it in performing arts as well in terms of venues, you know, music venues and things like that. Critical or leading role, again, we talked about this earlier, high compensation, pretty self-explanatory. It has to relate to the field. Usually we use Department of Labor statistics, you know, and sometimes they say, oh, no, that alone isn't enough. We want to see more targeted surveys or media reports from, you know, your industry. So that becomes a little bit difficult. But that's oftentimes a good criteria to meet because it's very tangible. I mean, you are either paid a high amount for that project, or, you know, you can show it through W-2s or invoices or pay stubs, or oftentimes, you know, I can get a letter from the agency showing that they were paid, you know, $12,000 per day to model in this, you know, Bulgari ad campaign. And then the last one is, so there's commercial success, which is, again, box office figures and, you know, ratings and things like that. And then any comparable evidence. So what you have to do, though, that may sound nice, any comparable evidence. They're really actually tough on it. They want you to say, why do you, you know, which ones of the above don't apply? Why don't they apply? And then, you know, why do X, Y, and Z alternatively apply? So, but that's something to keep in mind when you know, because a lot of these things may not apply in your field, especially in arts and entertainment, where a lot of it is based on kind of media. It becomes a little bit difficult. In terms of the process itself, so, you know, we go through it. We're like, okay, great. You've got tons of evidence. What are the practical aspects? There's an I-140 petition, which is where we establish, you know, you are an alien of extraordinary ability. And then you can either file the second step with it, so what we would call concurrently, or you can file it separately. You know, it's really up to you whether you file them together or separately. A lot of times, you know, I'll suggest filing it separately if, you know, if money is an issue, because then you know, you wait till the first part's approved to file the second part in terms of saving the filing fees. In terms of premium processing, only the I-140 is premium processed. The adjustment is not. So that's up to you if you want to do that. Some think there's a higher risk of RFE with premium processing. I don't really know. I think it just changes, you know, all the time. If time is an issue, timing is an issue, then yes, premium processing is there for that reason. But I don't necessarily think it's going to get approved or denied or RFE'd any faster or slower. I do think it's kind of at random. You do get work authorization when you file that second step with the adjustment. So a lot of times that's where if someone's, you know, not able to extend their O1, they want to file the adjustment so that they get work authorization while the application is pending. You know, some current issues or practice tips. Again, I don't know if this is getting too technical, and I know our time is running out, so I'll try and wrap this up soon. But, you know, if, let's say, you have applied, whether it's an O1 or an EB1, I mean, we're talking about EB1 here, let's say it's denied. I mean, first of all, it's very unpredictable. The standard is very subjective, so you want to try and make things as clear as possible and as easy for the officer as possible when you're giving, you know, providing your lawyer with evidence. That's, you know, the first thing I'll say that. But in terms of, let's say it's denied, should you reapply or should you appeal it? It depends. I mean, sometimes we've been very lucky where you just, put it back together, address maybe a couple of the deficiencies and refile it, and it's approved. There have been instances where we've, if you have a case that, it seems like a really egregious or bad denial, then maybe appealing it is the right way to go. Really it's up to you. It's up to your attorney. A big common question, Texas Service Center versus Nebraska Service Center, so TSC versus NSC. I mean, I don't know. I don't think that there's, again, a huge difference, but there are some people who swear by Texas and some people who think Nebraska premium processing is better. So I don't know that it really matters. They should all be uniform in their adjudications. They're probably not, but something to keep in mind. If you do file a regular processing, it takes somewhere between 4 and 6 months to receive a decision. Sometimes shorter or longer. Premium processing is 15 days, so that's something to keep in mind. You want to have strong criteria. Having 3-week criteria or 5-week criteria, even though you're kind of meeting 5, it's always better to very strongly meet 3 or very strongly meet 4, or to say you meet all 8. That's my thought about it. You want to highlight things as best as possible. Again, make it easier. Make it easy for the officer. And this brings me to my next point. Don't assume that the officer is familiar with popular culture, for instance. For those of us working in arts and entertainment, yes, I know what Vogue and Vanity Fair are. I'm pretty aware of their Elle or other magazines. We're very familiar with those, or with companies, for example, NBC Universal or Fox. You can't assume, or movies or TV shows, you just can't assume that the officer knows about them, so you want to provide them with those, the gross annual income, number of employees, or if it's a film, who else was in that film. Those kinds of things I think help your credits really stand out, because you're kind of making it easy for them to get an understanding. Again, in terms of regional local evidence, I would still include it, but you want to make sure that's not your only evidence, and you want to be able to show your national or international reach. International really means 2 countries. So you can be really well known in Australia, or you can be really well known in Australia and New Zealand. That qualifies as international, at least I think it does. And then the last point I'll make is to address Kazarian, the Kazarian framework, which is something that's only specific to the green card. Let's see. Can you guys hear me? I just want to make sure that the audio is still connected. I just got a message that says the audio was cut off. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Well, I'll continue, and I'm about to wrap it up. So again, if you need to log out, please go ahead and do so. Okay, everybody can hear me. Kazarian, thank you. Thanks, everybody. That is something new that has been incorporated for the last couple of years. So let's say you meet and I've seen this happen where they say, okay, you meet 3 of the 10, but considering all of the evidence, we still don't think you qualify because you have not demonstrated sustained a claim, or we don't think you're one of the small percentage at the top of your field. It's denied. And this is, there's a case Kazarian. So what they say is, they look at the 3 to show you met at least 3 of the 10, and then they do a second analysis, which is called the final merits determination, where they kind of look at everything as a whole, and they look at it as a whole to see if you really do meet the standard. So standard of review, which brings me to the next point, is preponderance. So you want to show more likely than not, and that's what I mean when you want to make it easy for the officer. You want to give them everything possible so that there is no room for doubt that you meet the criteria, because the stronger your evidence is, the more likely it is that they're going to find that you meet this, the final merits of the case, and that you have reached that very high level. And again, it's a subjective test. It is, but you want to include as much as possible in order to make it easy for the officer. But it's still something you have to discuss or address in your petition. You know, let's say you file and you get a request for evidence. First of all, I have to say, don't take it personally. They're very, very common. A lot of times, you know, they're just issued, I don't know. Sometimes I think in a premium processing case, maybe the officer ran out of time and the 15-day clock was coming to a close. Don't tell USCIS I said that, but you know, sometimes it's that, because I feel like you submit everything and then they come back with what we call a kitchen sink RFE, and they say that you haven't shown anything. So sometimes you just have to re-argue all of your points, send in everything again. Other times you have to read the RFE carefully, because they, will contain, what I say here, inaccurate statements of fact or law. They'll say, oh, I've had the wrong person's name listed in RFE. I had one for a model, and they were calling her a graphic designer. Sometimes they have that because they have these templates, and I don't know, there are some mistakes. So you want to make sure that those are being addressed, but that you also understand, what are they really asking for? What do they really want here? Can I provide that answer, that information? If you can provide it, you should. I don't think this is the place to be too proud and say, you know what, they should know what this is, or I can't believe my friend got a green card. I can't believe they're asking me this, and all of that. I mean, I think at the end of the day, if you can respond, you should respond with as much as you can, and say, oh, I can't ask that person for another letter, or I'm too embarrassed, that kind of a thing. You kind of have to really go all out and get as much as you can. That said, you can only submit evidence that was there at the time of filing. My rule is, let's say you worked on something, you filed it in August, and you were taping something in August, but at the time you didn't have evidence. To me, I think you could still include that in an RFE situation, because the work had already been done, and technically the evidence was probably, it was in existence at that time. Whether or not, you were able to have that letter, then no. But you can't use an Emmy nomination. So if you filed it in August and the Emmy nominations, just came out now for something that you filmed before, you probably can't use that. So that's something to keep in mind. So then the next thing, so EB1's done. We finished with that. If you are not, maybe you don't feel like you have that, your evidence is that strong, and if you have employer sponsorship, so let's say you're an art director or an animator where you work for an employer, they're eager to keep you, they're willing to sponsor you, there is the EB2 Exceptional Ability Sched A Group 2 category where you can apply for a green card this way. It requires employer sponsorship, and it requires a degree. And for the exceptional ability, you do have a PERM process, which is a separate discussion. So I'll mention it here, where you have to go through recruitment and all of that, prevailing wage, unless you do the Sched A. So if you do a Group 2 Sched A, and it's limited only to sciences and arts, so it's a good option for animators, visual effects. But you have to keep in mind, you do need employer sponsorship. But the Sched A Group 2, you don't need to go through the recruitment. So that's the kind of the bright point of this exceptional ability criteria. So the criteria are to show 3 of the following. And then here the criteria are listed. There's a degree. And I'm going to rush through this because I'm afraid we're running out of time. But here the criteria are, you have to show 3 of the following. As you can see, they're not as, strict or high level as the EB1 category, but they are listed here. And I'm so sorry. I think we've run out of time here. But if you have any questions that I wasn't able to get to, I do see a few typed here into the screen, so I'll try and get back to you on those. But if you can email me with any more specific questions, I'd be more than happy to respond. If you can, just give me a few days. Sometimes it takes me that long just to get through everything. But if you want I'm happy to review your eligibility or your CV or something just to give you an idea. Again, I don't know that I can get super in-depth, but I'm more than happy to run through your options. And I really do appreciate you tuning in. I will try and do another one of these probably in a few months' time. And if, again, if I can answer questions, email me. And I think that's it. I hope you guys have a great afternoon. I hope you found this informative. And if not, then please feel free to give me some feedback on any other topics that you would like to hear discussed next time. All right, thank you. Have a good afternoon.